Welcome to the Trend Detection Podcast, powered by Siemens. And now your host, Niall Sullivan.
Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of the Trend Detection Podcast. I'm really pleased to be joined by one of our recurring guests, who's been on quite a few times now. I sort of lose count after a while with all of our recurring guests, but Tom's been on lots of times. We've covered loads of really cool topics. And today we're covering a topic that Tom actually brought to the table, which actually he often does. And it's important actually because he's speaking to customers all the time, all around the world. Well, I'd say in Europe at least, but yeah, he knows exactly what our customers and companies are talking about at the moment. So today we're going to talk about turning uptime into profit, and how it affects the bottom line, I guess. But before we go into that, Tom, maybe just sort of very quickly reintroduce yourself to the audience, and then sort of just explain sort of why you sort of brought this topic to the table.
Yeah, with pleasure. So, hi, Niall. Tom again. Tom Jacques. My name is really in that position so that we can look at solutions engineering, look at building solutions for different regions, different areas. And the reason I brought this topic to you is because, often maintenance gets looked at as something that's a hindrance. And often, there is a competitive advantage within that. If you can do your maintenance more effectively, you can maximize asset lifespan, you can look at operational efficiencies and so forth. That's actually a really good way of looking at maintenance as something that you can actually benefit from, as opposed to something that's, inherently a cost center for you.
And I guess, first of all, why is maintenance sort of perceived as that quite often?
I think a lot of it comes down to, you want to have a machine that runs, almost perpetually. Would be great if you could have a machine that runs endlessly with no faults, no degradation, no friction. But I think until we get to that stage, the goal has to be, how do you do that maintenance most effectively, with the least expenditure, with the least amount of stoppages and outages of a certain facility or operation. Obviously for us, that's where predictive maintenance comes in. And that's what I want to go into with you today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I guess just to sort of frame the topic a little bit more. So if we're positioning sort of maintenance instead of a cost on a spreadsheet, but actually as a value adding, part of an organisation, how would you sort of position that from your point of view?
Yeah, so a lot of it, I think, is coming down to preventing problems before they occur is most often the case. So if you can anticipate failure, you can react to that. You can do that maintenance preemptively before you're actually reacting to the stoppage itself, to a collapsed bearing or, to a filter that's blocked. Something that's actually gone wrong and now it's causing your line to stop or whatever process you've got to completely break down or even to slow down. If you're able to lubricate things as and when it's needed, maintenance ensures consistent uptime, so operational performance, extension of asset lifetimes, and so forth. And for me, that's really where why this topic comes up, and it comes up a lot with customers because this is what we're trying to optimize. This is a fundamental level what we're trying to look at: pumps, gearboxes, etc., and just how do we keep those operational. We talked about safety in the past as another aspect of those things. If things are get into a dangerous state. That podcast exists somewhere amongst these others. But again, that's where this one is really discussing, the cost benefit of predictive maintenance.
And is it a case, I guess, first of all, thinking beyond some of those, because you mentioned safety there, which maybe doesn't sort of jump out to people as like an obvious sort of an outcome for a business, but is it a case of business having to look beyond some of those sort of obvious, let's say, saving downtime as one, unplanned downtime as one? Is it a case of trying to look beyond those metrics and look more broadly?
It is, yeah. I think it is. A lot of it is often things that are on the periphery, and you don't perhaps see them as a direct benefit, but these are all resulting factors of having, predictive maintenance in place. You benefit in lots of other ways that aren't directly visible, and I think when it comes to safety is one of them. Having a competitive advantage when you're able to anticipate failures and your competition aren't able to do that. That's something as well. Training the staff. So if you've got all the knowledge is captured in one place, you're able to use that as an educational resource for the other members of staff. You get on board a new maintenance person, he's got the knowledge of a seasoned, experienced guy who's got lots and lots of experience. Of course, it's never going to get to that level. That person's going to still have to practice, learn how to do that, certain maintenance on heat exchangers, pumps, motors, whatever the assets are. But having that insight that's been put there by lots of other workers is really powerful.
And so, if we turn the focus towards predictive maintenance in particular, how does that sort of help to solve some of these change this perception of of maintenance within an organisation?
It's a good question. I think there's often a lot of misconceptions around it. You don't see that immediate ROI because it's in lots of different areas. Maybe you don't see how scalable it is as a solution. That's often overlooked. And I think maybe technically it looks too complex or it looks expensive from an outside perspective. This could be only large scale operations that, it can definitely lead businesses to think that it's inaccessible. Or actually it's just another software that adds to this big long list of other softwares that they have to look after. Do we really need this one? And I think until you see the benefits, any new transformative technology often, has to be seen to be believed. That's also part of my role. So that's one of the reasons we spend hours each week demonstrating, the Senseye Predictive Maintenance app to anybody who wants to see it and consider starting a pilot.
And maybe we could dig into that a little bit more. So in terms of those misconceptions, because like you said, you're speaking to people, every single week, every single day about this. What are some of the preconceptions they have when they come into a meeting with someone like yourself?
One of the main ones, Niall, I think is definitely complexity. It often can seem very complex if you've got lots of different assets, different asset types. It can seem very, very complex. You've also maybe got skills gaps, so you don't know if you've got the right kind of people to onboard a project like this or work with a tool like this. But oftentimes you've got maintenance teams. They've got a certain amount of knowledge. Maybe they're not the most knowledgeable about those particular assets, but I mean, again, that's where Senseye is actually. These things are misconceptions because Senseye is there to help you with scalability. It's there to learn baseline of an asset within just a few days. Within a week, you've got a good baseline of an asset. What normal operation looks like. You can see comparisons against how that's shifting. You can see anomalous detections. You can see patterns in the data just based on that baseline. And I think that's almost quite hard to comprehend in many cases. And we've seen customers who get onboarded, they start to learn about the process and learn about how good that can be in a real world example. And that really, again, is where these misconceptions can start to be dissolved. You can have an AI assistant that assists you and actually makes things better. Even if you've already got very good operational maintenance, maybe you're over maintaining stuff because that's a very good thing to do as opposed to reacting to breakdowns. And that's where we have to try and explain that you layer on top of that. Even still, you can layer on top of that predictive maintenance so that you don't have too much maintenance. You're doing too much time-based maintenance is the other end of it.
I mean, that's exactly it. In some of the conversations I've had, I think there is that misconception that predictive maintenance is there to replace all of your other maintenance approaches, but that's not the case, right? It's about maybe making other, like preventative maintenance. You don't have to check something so often, for example, right? It's that kind of thing. It's not about ripping something out and putting something new in. It's about sort of adapting and into an existing sort of workflow. If that's the best way to put it.
That's exactly how I would put it. And I think if you take any example, if you took, for example, an automotive parts manufacturer and they're struggling to justify PdM, due to the perceived costs and maybe misunderstandings. If an unexpected conveyor failure starts to delay shipments, you can help to prove the value of Senseye. You can ask the co-pilot to identify small issues in that process. Gearbox wear, you got teeth that are starting to degrade. Just as an example, that can help you if you can replace those parts and do that work during quieter hours or during shutdowns. We can share loads of these examples. We've saved customers, many thousands in downtime. And I think that really starts to reinforce the affordability and the transformative power of PdM, as opposed to what looks like quite a daunting concept from the outside. And I would say we've done that quite a few times with various customers.
I mean, it's an interesting question, about because we can show, like you say, quite rightly, we can show demonstrable success amongst lots of customers in lots of different industry, and of course there is a cost and an upfront cost with that. I mean, how do you balance that kind of, people thinking about, what budget do I have, what investment can I put in, and what am I going to get out on the other side? Because, predictive maintenance, as we know, isn't something you can just sort of set up and just leave it and it'll do its magic, right? I mean, that's why you're here, you're part of the team to do that.
Exactly.
But how do you sort of balance those two contrasting things? Because it's like chicken and the egg, isn't it? Is the way I sort of think about it.
It can be, and I think sometimes it comes down to a lack of data in the first instance, in terms of you don't know exactly down to the few euros or pounds exactly how much your downtime is costing you. Maybe you don't have a full overview of all the different regions of a plant or all the different areas of a certain facility, and you can't quantify exactly what your downtime is costing you. You think you're doing quite a good job of over maintaining it, but then you also don't know how much over maintenance, where you're doing far too much maintenance. And I think, first of all, you need to not have exact numbers. We don't expect customers to have exact numbers, but a good idea of what your definition of success is going to look like. So when you implement PdM, you need to try and do that with an objective. So you're trying to, improve safety is definitely one of them, improve operational efficiencies, improve just maybe coordination between teams. You've got different people on different shifts. They don't know what each other have done during their own shift, and that information has not been passed on. Maybe you're working too much on the same machinery. You're not working enough on something else. If you compile all that into one piece of software, that integrates with your CMMS software, that integrates with your other workflows, that's really, really powerful. And I think that answers your question, to be honest. And again, it makes me always think back to safety as another added benefit on top of all the other things that you can quantify as a monetary value. It's the other things as well.
And I guess are companies like, are you having to sort of say to individuals that safety is an outcome, or is it something they're already aware of? I'm just wondering whether it's something that sort of a surprise them, like, oh, I didn't realise that could have that. So sometimes people don't think that far down the line. Like I said, it's not an immediate impact, but it's actually a knock-on effect, isn't it? But,
yeah. In fact, we were with customers last week, and that came up as one of their main objectives, so one of their definitions of success. And it's good to see customers that aware of it. Sometimes it is, we mention it and it's like, oh yeah, we hadn't thought about that. That's definitely something to, add to the other list of benefits that this is going to bring us. Our main objective is to increase output in production by 10%. That's our top target. We're not really, anything else that happens is just, collateral in addition to that. So it was great last week to be discussing safety as a main, primary reason.
I guess you anticipate, maybe it's hard to sort of look in the crystal ball as we often do on this podcast, but do you see that as becoming more of a requirement from a PdM solution? Something that's brought to the table more in the types of conversations you have?
It could be, but I think one of the key things you have to think is that any software solution, anything that you implement is going to cost something, and in some form you're going to have to get those costs back. So extended machine lifespan is always going to be a priority, I would say. Also, just anticipate things so you can catch things before they fail. That thus increases production time. Also over maintenance. We've mentioned that already a few times during just this conversation. But we see that a lot in areas like food and beverage, where things are, we've moved away from reactive maintenance, but we've moved now towards doing too much maintenance. And again, that's where predictive maintenance is really, really powerful. Gives customers, that additional benefit. And I think now more than ever, having the ability to interrogate a system using the Copilot, ask about, certain elements of the tool itself. Tell me more about this motor. Tell me more about exactly what's been taking place. What is this failure similar to something we've seen in the past? What tools do I need to fix this? And the Copilot can go off to the user manual, can go off to the service manual, look through it, and anticipate, pretty well what kind of things you're going to need to do that work, how you're going to do it, what you're going to gain from that as a result. And I honestly believe that Senseye is the best tool in the world, in terms of in the marketplace to do all of these different things. I really do feel that it's the best at all of those things collectively.
Well, of course, I agree with that. But it's hard to be objective on a podcast from Siemens about the Senseye product. But yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, talking about, but to bring it back to the co-pilot sort of stuff and relating it to what we're sort of talking about today, does this new technology? If we're talking AI, if we're now talking Gen AI, and with even more knowledge, as you described, from manuals and things like that, taking knowledge from these different sources, does that strengthen the importance of maintenance within an organization?
Yeah, massively. Because you've got lots of different areas of a factory with different machines. You'll have certain ways of maintaining some of them and certain ways of maintaining others. It's never been possible before that you can consolidate all of that into one place. And you've got one software then that tells you, no matter what assets you've got, if it's ventilation systems or robots on the factory floor, it can point the maintenance teams to exactly what they need to prioritize. And I think when it comes to maintenance, prioritization is key. So you know exactly what to do, and having a tool that can do that for you based on live data, historical data, elements of even time-based maintenance. So if there's a 6-monthly schedule, that can of course also be factored in and just get added to the maintenance list of things to do. And we're not going to get away from that in some cases, especially in things like food and beverage, pharmaceutical. There are certain expectations to meet regulation where you have to do something every 6 months, 12 months. In fact, in basically all industries, there will be an element of time-based maintenance being essentially effective. But when it comes to the other things in the middle, maybe you do something every 12 months, but now you've got the ability to see a bearing starting to collapse after 8. You don't need to wait another 4 months. And somewhere in the middle probably have a breakdown of large proportions. It gives you another insight into all of what's taken place.
And that's important. But I guess part of the key to all this is because when when you follow a certain process, and maybe for a number of years, maybe decades even, how can we facilitate that shift towards utilizing a tool like Senseye or others on the market, let's say, that can help sort of support with decision making and be able to trust that it delivers what it says.
It comes down, I think, first of all, to seeing some success cases. So we can always share those with customers. If they've got motors and pumps, and another customer's got conveyor belts and heat exchangers, we've got very good examples of success in all those different areas. But then what it comes down to is having some proper resource applied to the project, so you can see this will affect different maintenance teams across the factory, and these guys need to then be involved in the project, see cases get generated, see how to give the feedback to the tool. So it's not just a dumb tool that works with whatever you start it with. It learns continuously. So because you've got the ability to give it feedback every time a case gets opened or closed, you can every closure you have the ability to say if it was useful to you or not. Fill it in. Was Senseye right to open this case for you, Mr. Maintenance Manager? And you can fill that in, so you can say if it was useful or not, and stop with the nuisance alerts, as old-fashioned condition monitoring systems would have typically had. Every time you hit a threshold, this thing's going off like a like a broken siren or something. And now you've got the ability to say, no, don't be so sensitive. This is normal operation. That's exactly what you should be doing. That's where Senseye again is really powerful. And every time you speak to the co-pilot, you can give feedback to if that element of feedback was good or bad, how it can be improved in future. And of course, also, changing the measure settings, increase, decrease sensitivities of certain, temperatures, flows, different measures within assets more broadly. So it's a very finite tool. You can do a lot with it, including also, derived measures, add loads of other logic specifically for that process. If you've got 20 motors all doing the same operation, you can add derived measures for all 20 of them. So that logic becomes, universal across all of them. Really, really powerful stuff. At SPS, I think just 2 weeks ago, customers were loving seeing this kind of stuff, and they bring a troubling issue that they've had with previous solutions or something they've tried to create themselves. And no matter what we got thrown 2 weeks ago, I think in almost all cases we were able to show, Senseye's considered that. We've shown how that could be done. If you make a different product on the same production line, we can factor that in as well. We've got regimes, we've got control parameters. We can compare bearings and motors. I'm really going off now, but I think in answer to your question, there's lots and lots of different facets to the tool.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, all that is fantastic, but I guess ultimately, and to bring it back, we talk about sort of turning uptime into profit, or turning maintenance into profit. You could almost call it. But there comes a point where you've got great technology, and you're working with teams and trying to get them on board into the app and seeing cases and doing all this. But ultimately, there comes a point where there needs to be a proof of return on investment to leadership teams, who, of course, I mean, and quite rightly too, are going to be either skeptical about the cost, or will question it in some way, which again, is perfectly acceptable. But how should people go about demonstrating that? And it's obviously not something left to the customer to do themselves. I think you're going to tell me, but how can, because that's obviously a big jump sometimes and quite a big barrier to sort of getting projects up both off the ground and then scaling at a later point.
That's a good point, and I think when you've got customers, the success cases that we've got to show this, it's not just limited to large companies anymore. We've got small to medium size companies at the higher end that can still make very good use of this. At SBS, we had lots of OEM customers coming to us to talk about how they can use it for their servitization, how they could implement different areas of this, so they can strategically figure out where to send their maintenance teams, the service teams, on different days of the week. And it's really starting to open the door now in terms of not just being an early adopter technology, but becoming a more universally available solution. And when it comes to proving the value, it comes in many different ways. So you've got additional operational process, so you're more productive in a sense by 5% or 10% or 20%, whatever it is. Safety, of course, sometimes you can't put a value on an arm or a leg. I think never, in fact. So that's something where you have to think about other metrics across the business. Also, education, training staff is really important, especially when you've got complex machinery, complex equipment. You need a certain level of intelligence, a certain level of knowledge, is what I mean more, to understand what to do next. Which tool do you need? Which process do you need to follow to troubleshoot a certain piece of equipment? It's very unlikely that you're going to know that for all machines, especially when you're new, but even if you've been there for many, many years. And so that's, again, where Senseye is really powerful. Increase, the amount of usable hours you've got. So rather than spending many hours doing overtime or doing, just far too much maintenance, you can scale that back and use those hours more effectively in other areas. Maybe you're doing grease sampling all the time, but you don't really need to be doing that. You could use those hours more effectively and leave Senseye just to tell you when those grease samples need to be taken, based on an increased torque or an increased vibration somewhere. That's indicative of bearing failure, or something is starting to collapse or starting to fail. In many ways, failure modes, we've seen loads of them across different assets. But it's not going to come from one source. I think very rarely it will come from one source. Niall, in answer to your question.
No, exactly. If only it was that simple, right? So basically.
Yeah.
But I also need to touch upon the fact that often, I don't know whether the sizes of businesses you speak to, but there might be a perception sometimes that predictive maintenance is only for a certain size of businesses. But I mean, what do you see? If we're talking about smaller businesses, how they can, maintenance as a whole, but also use predictive maintenance as a competitive advantage at that level.
Well, so this is it. So it is becoming a competitive advantage. The companies, of course, who adopt technologies earlier, especially solutions like tried and tested PdM solutions, are starting to see the benefits later down the line, where they can be far more efficient and effective with the resources they've got. When it comes to project size, I was recently traveling with a customer where we looked at just 10 conveyor systems. We looked to implement that. We looked to start a project that's going to work for them as a pilot. And they don't have enormous facilities, but what they do have is very, very fast flow. It's in a recycling center where they have lots and lots of waste coming in. they need these things to work. They cannot afford downtime at all. Any overheating of motors or bearing issues is just absolutely not possible. Especially when they try and optimize and improve the plant in many other ways, which is what they're trying to do. One area of the plant is going to become twice as busy next year, and they absolutely cannot afford downtime. So having a PdM solution in that instance is very valuable because it allows them also elsewhere to be more strategic, implement new machinery, update things, other motors, pumps, other digital systems. And that is, again, another benefit to Senseye. So yeah, project size is really starting to vary, really from big multinationals down through to companies like this one.
I'm really pleased you sort of brought up like a real case example. But the most interesting thing I took out from that is this shift in budget. It's like the savings you make in one area, you can then go, actually, I can then invest in other areas as well, which I think is a really fascinating sort of story to tell. So it's not just, again, thinking about this sort of cost of maintenance, but if you can make your maintenance more efficient, then it does become a profit center where you can then invest the profits, in many other areas of the plant or elsewhere.
Absolutely. And if you go across all the different customers that we've got, it'll be interesting to see the secondary, use cases that they've got where they did this and this, but actually it benefited them in other ways. And I think in some cases we've got case studies that show that because we did this, it enabled us to do this. And when it comes to predictive maintenance, I think, as we're really saying in this podcast, it comes multifaceted. So it's going to come to you in many different ways. And I think also the one that is sometimes touched on but not enough is really the education. So how long does it take to train a member of staff to get them up to a certain level? That can cost businesses tens of thousands to get someone to a very, very good level. If you've got a way of teaching someone quickly, they've also got the ability to self-teach. So they can sit quietly and ask Copilot, I've got this machine that's sitting in front of me. It's big, it's complex. I really don't know how to handle it. They can spend hours trawling through the manuals if they've got time. They probably don't. That's very labor intensive. It takes a long, long time. It's also not going to be correlated to the data. So with things like the Copilot now that are within Senseye, as standard, by the way, this is just a standard feature of the tool. It really gives you the ability to say, right, this is the current status of the data. This is what the machine's been doing for the last 4 months. What do I need to do to fix this? It's showing me that there's oscillations and vibrations that I've never seen before. We've done a similar maintenance in the past. My colleague who's been here for 20 years. But what should I do? What's the best thing for me to try and do to this? And they're going to learn really, really quickly. And maybe if it's not that exact thing, it shows them, loads of other possibilities for something that could have gone wrong, something that needs to be fixed and solved. And this is a massively powerful part of Senseye.
No, exactly. I mean, that's a really good example of that. You mentioned sort of Copilot sort of number of times. I mean, maybe we can put other things in the bucket like AI, machine learning, and I guess from what you've described already, these are fundamentally shifted how PdM is perceived in the market right already. And I've been with Senseye now Siemens for 3.5 years, and I've seen a massive change in the market. Have you seen a similar sort of change?
I have, and I think to focus back on some of the other tools within Senseye, just the intelligence that's in the background and able to look at a pattern of something's happening. Maybe to you and I, it looks exactly the same as it did yesterday. But actually within that are really small, nuanced behaviors that are indicative of a failure that you can only do with an intelligent tool that's been picking up system data for a long, long time with correlational data. So you can see if the motor does this, it's followed a pattern with the bearings for a long time. And now there starts to be a deviation between those two. And that again is where, having a tool that's got that intelligence to see almost like micro changes within a system. No maintenance engineer really can do that. We can do also offline monitoring. So we could do a vibration assessment every month or every 6 months, and you'll see degradation. But nothing is really better than watching that thing 24/7, 365, and plugging it into smart algorithms. Of course, if you do another online test, I think we haven't really talked about that, but if you do an online oil sample, or you do something that's in a lab, or a measurement that's been done by professionals that come in, you can also add that to the application. You can add notes, you can add work events, you can also add those other measurements that have been taken. And again, that all feeds back into the same intelligence system to give you decision support.
And that's absolutely it. That's absolutely it. I think that from what you've described, I just want to sort of bring it all together now, because I see we're coming towards the end of our chat. But in terms, I think you've really outlined very clearly about this sort of perception of maintenance and where it can actually be shown, to be a profit center and not a cost center. But is there a way you can, just to finish, I guess, is to summarize that, Tom, in your own words, just how companies can shift that perception from a cost center to a profit center?
Yeah, it can be difficult to see all of that and put it all into perspective. I agree with you that it can be difficult, but I think in my own words, in any process, there's, especially in operations and manufacturing, there can be a lot of data from many different sources. And I think Senseye is very good at being able to consolidate all of that to internalize it and make smart decisions on a deeper level, much faster than operators and maintenance teams. And I think that ability to correlate patterns of behavior, that's what makes Senseye an invaluable resource, to try and troubleshoot and firefight issues, particularly mechanical issues. And I mentioned it earlier, but I really think that's where Senseye is, probably the best product in the market for doing that at this time. Just because of how much mechanical, technical understanding it's got. It's a tool that allows you to do so much more with the information that you've probably already got. So system data, maintenance data, it pulls it all together and allows you to benefit from it, of course, in terms of time, which often has a monetary value, in terms of safety, which of course has its own value, and loads of other things, which we could talk about for ages. But really that covers the fact that I think Senseye is a powerful tool. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to discuss it, for being, an advantage. It moves maintenance away from being just a needless expense to being something that, if you do it properly, it really becomes a competitive advantage that has, of course, you're going to profit from that. If you're changing bearings before they collapse, your production line doesn't stop. Some of those things are obvious, but there's loads of other stuff that's been, really a real pleasure to talk about. No,
amazing. No, and thank you. And like I said, I think your experience of talking to customers directly, and you had a really good example earlier. Yeah, because I think that for me is the big takeaway, is that the money, the savings you can make, and in some industries it can be really significant changes. And we're putting aside things like safety, like I said, very important of course, but not something you'd see on a spreadsheet. But the savings you can take and then reinvest elsewhere, I think it's the most powerful message to take from all this, which is really fascinating. But no, for today, thank you again, Tom, for taking part and joining us today. I'm sure it won't be long until we're chatting again, or I hope it isn't. I haven't scared you off.
It's always a pleasure. It's always a pleasure.
No, excellent. But no, thank you for your time, and thank you everyone out there for listening, and see you on the next episode. Thank you very much.
Cheers, guys. Bye.
Please like and subscribe on all major podcast channels, and find out more about Senseye Predictive Maintenance at Siemens.com.